This book is not a warning about love. It is a warning about what sometimes hides behind it. The irresistible trap begins with a familiar moment. The perfect person, the perfect timing, the perfect chemistry. A connection so seamless it feels cinematic, faded, almost too good to question. And then, without reason, a subtle uneasiness you can't explain. A pause, a flicker, a tiny voice inside you asking, why does something feel off? This book is about answering that question. Manipulative seduction doesn't arrive like danger. It arrives like comfort. It mirrors healthy attraction so closely that you cannot tell where sincerity ends and strategy begins. The same warmth, the same attention, the same closeness. Until one day, the affection that once felt liberating begins to feel like a leash. The most dangerous influence is always the one wrapped in tenderness. Control is never clearer than when it hides inside care. Here we explore the quiet architecture behind that shift. How charm slowly becomes a system of leverage. Because despite how convincing they appear, manipulators do not pursue love. They pursue position, they seek advantage, access emotional real estate. Love is the costume, leverage is the plot. Think of seduction as a psychological blueprint with layers. Attraction the hook, consistency the comfort, emotion the bond, and dependency the trap. Healthy attraction builds connection. Dark seduction builds compliance. One strengthens your autonomy, the other slowly siphons it away. This book teaches you to see that difference, even when it's dressed in the sweetest intentions. You will not find fear-mongering here. You will find clarity, because clarity is what breaks spells. Each chapter exposes an invisible system of influence. How praise can be engineered, how vulnerability can be weaponized, how timing can be chosen to lower your guard, and how desire can be shaped to serve someone else's plan. The aim is not to make you suspicious of connection, but to make you so aware that you cannot be quietly shaped by it. Some readers come for protection, to recognize red flags before they become chains. Others come for understanding, to decode subtle power dynamics so they can navigate relationships with steadiness and self-respect. Regardless of why you're here, you'll find concrete examples, psychological framing, and simple habits that help you sense hidden motives long before they tighten around you. Real protection begins with noticing. A glance held a second too long. A compliment that steers you. A perfect match that escalates too quickly. A confession that arrives exactly when you feel lonely. When you learn to see the patterns beneath the feelings, you reclaim what every manipulator tries to steal first, your perception. This book is not a weapon, it is a lens. Use it to sharpen your instincts, to ask better questions, to choose more freely. Influence is everywhere, but not every influence is dark. Ethical attraction gives you space, respects your pace, and honors your boundaries. Manipulative charm rushes, pressures, and blurs your judgment while pretending to love you. Before we begin, remember the reinforced hook at the heart of this journey. Let's unmask the hidden architecture behind charm, because what feels like love may actually be a slow invasion. Welcome to the truth behind desire. Let's begin. The mechanics of magnetism. Why you were drawn in. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. You didn't fall for their charm by accident. They engineered it. That spark, that rush, that strange feeling that you've known them forever. None of that was destiny. It was design. You walked into a carefully crafted gravitational field, and your heart never even saw it coming. Psychologists call this emotional magnetism. And once you understand it, you'll see why you act the way you do, why you ignored your instincts, why you excused red flags, why someone you barely knew felt more familiar than people you've known your whole life. Your relationships, your habits, even the way you choose who to trust. All of it is influenced by this one psychological pattern. But here's where it gets even worse. The people with the strongest magnetism are usually the ones who learn to weaponize it. They don't stumble into charisma. They build it. They sharpen it. They use it. Charm, charisma, confidence, those aren't random traits. They are tools. Tools used by emotional hunters who study you long before they touch your heart. They scan for micro-reactions. They listen for the tremble in your voice when you talk about your childhood. They notice your silence when you talk about your last relationship. They hear your unmet needs, even the ones you try to hide. And the entire time, They shapeshift into exactly what you've been starving for. Most people stop here, and that's the biggest mistake. They think, oh, so they pretended to be perfect. But that's not the full story. The real trap is much deeper. Because the truth is brutally simple. Your brain helped them do it. The neuroscience of instant connection is not romantic. It's chemical manipulation on the deepest level. Dopamine surges when someone mirrors your emotions. Oxytocin rises when someone gazes into your eyes. Just a little too long. Your attachment system fires when someone tells you, I feel like I've known you forever, even though you met them 5 days ago. And your mind? It confuses neurochemical chaos with fate. Here's the painful part. Your brain doesn't fall in love with people. It falls in love with patterns, especially the ones that feel familiar, even if they once hurt you. That's why the illusion of destiny feels so real. That's why perfect compatibility hits like an emotional drug. That's why your heart whispers, this must be it, while your instincts quietly scream, run. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. Emotionally intelligent individuals are often more susceptible, not less. You notice details, you feel deeply, you connect quickly, you empathize fast. And manipulators, they exploit exactly that. Your strengths become openings. Your sensitivity becomes a map. Your emotional awareness becomes a doorway they walk through. This happens because your brain is wired to bond and not to question. It wants safety, predictability, closeness. It doesn't want to investigate every charming smile. It doesn't want to doubt every tender moment. It wants to believe. It wants to hope. And a skilled manipulator knows how to feed that hope in perfect doses. Just enough warmth to hook you. Just enough mystery to keep you chasing. Your mind thinks, this person finally sees me. But the reality is far harsher. They only see the parts of you that benefit them. If that hits you good, it means you needed it. Because the moment you believe someone is the one without evidence, without time, without reality, you hand them the key to your emotional kingdom. So how do you break the cycle? Start with this. Slow down the chemistry. When someone feels too perfect, give it time. Watch their patterns, not their promises. Real connection grows at a human pace, not an intoxicating one. Real compatibility feels steady, not cinematic. And real love doesn't need to hypnotize you. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Replace emotional speed with emotional observation. When you pause, when you step back, when you notice instead of reacting, you break their spell. You turn magnetism into clarity. And clarity is the one thing a manipulator can never survive. This is how you take back your power. This is how you turn their illusion into your awakening. The arsenal of influence. Covert tactics revealed. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. The people who manipulate you the most are often the ones who swear they'd never hurt you. And what looks like affection, concern, or vulnerability is sometimes nothing more than strategy, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in charm, wrapped in exactly what you want to hear. Most of the manipulation you've experienced didn't feel like manipulation at all. It felt like connection. Psychologists call this covert influence. And once you understand it, you'll see why you've forgiven the wrong people, trusted the wrong promises, and doubted your own instincts when they were trying to protect you. Your relationships, your boundaries, even your self-worth. All of it can be quietly rewritten by psychological tactics the other person isn't even consciously aware of. But here's where it gets even worse. These tactics don't start with cruelty, they start with intensity. Love bombing isn't just romantic excitement. It's emotional intoxication. You're flooded with validation, affection, attention, compliments, desire. Everything happens fast, too fast, but the speed feels flattering, not alarming. Early idealization creates emotional dependency before you even realize you're depending on anything. They lift you so high that when the drop comes, you don't blame them. You blame yourself. Most people stop here, and that's the biggest mistake. They think love bombing is just a lot of attention. They don't see the real trap, the switch. The moment where intensity becomes a leash, the warmth cools, the affection slows, the validation fades. Suddenly you're doing emotional acrobatics to get back what they gave so easily at the beginning. And now the game has begun. Psychology says people don't withdraw suddenly because they're overwhelmed. They withdraw because the high they gave you has served its purpose. You're hooked, and now they control the dosage. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. Gaslighting doesn't always look like screaming accusations or blatant denial. Soft invalidations that sound reasonable. The kind of corrections that make you second-guess your memory, your reactions, your tone, your gut. You walk away from conversations feeling wrong, but you can't explain why. You feel confused, but there's no evidence. And confusion without evidence feels like your fault. This happens because your brain hates conflict more than it hates distortion. Your mind would rather believe you misheard than admit someone is subtly rewriting your perception. It protects you from the truth by convincing you to question yourself instead. It thinks it's keeping you safe, but the reality is that it makes you easier to influence, easier to silence, easier to control. Then comes the invisible toolkit, the micro-manipulations. Intermittent reinforcement keeps you chasing. Reward withdrawal cycles keep you trying. Selective honesty gives just enough truth to make the lies believable. Strategic vulnerability creates the illusion of intimacy. They share confessions that feel raw and personal, but they're crafted to win your loyalty, not build trust. They reveal weakness to make you protect them. They reveal pain to make you excuse them. They reveal wounds to make you stay. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. Manipulators don't need to break you to control you. They just need to subtly tilt your balance. They only have to make you confused, uncertain, or emotionally hungry. They only have to give you a taste of connection and then ration it. They only have to adjust the emotional temperature until you stop noticing the cold. If that hits you good, it means you're finally seeing the pattern instead of the person. Influence doesn't look like domination. It looks like care. It looks like closeness. It looks like everything you once wished for, weaponized. So how do you break the cycle? Start with this. Pay attention to consistency, not intensity. Anyone can give you everything for a week. Anyone can open up strategically. Anyone can be charming on purpose. But consistency reveals character. Patterns reveal truth. And manipulation always cracks under steady observation. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Don't measure people by how they treat you at their best. Measure them by how they treat you when they think they don't have to try. That's where the real person lives. That's where the mask slips. That's where the manipulation ends. And where your power begins. Erosion of autonomy. The slippery slope. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. People don't lose themselves all at once. They fade. One softened no. One sacrificed boundary, one tiny compromise that shouldn't have mattered but somehow did. Autonomy isn't stolen dramatically, it's eroded quietly. And the scariest part, you usually don't notice until you're standing in a life that doesn't feel like yours anymore. Psychologists call this gradual boundary dissolution. And once you understand it, you'll see why you tolerated things you swore you never would. Your relationships, your decisions, even your personality. All of it can be reshaped by someone who slowly convinces you that accommodating them is the same thing as loving them. At first, your no is respected. Then it's negotiated. Then it's questioned. And eventually it's punished. But here's where it gets even worse. The penalties for asserting yourself aren't always angry outbursts or blatant pressure. Sometimes the punishment is silence, distance, disappointment. A subtle withdrawal of warmth that teaches your brain one cruel rule. Agreeing earns peace. Disagreeing creates tension. The slow shift from respect to entitlement begins here. And once entitlement takes root, your autonomy becomes optional to them. Psychology says, your boundaries don't collapse because the other person is strong. They collapse because you're human. Your brain chooses connection over conflict every time, unless you consciously intervene. You tell yourself it's just easier this way. You rationalize. You give in. You stretch yourself thin enough to fit their preferences. You call it compromise, but deep down, you feel the cost. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. Isolation doesn't start with someone banning your friends or demanding you cut ties. Isolation begins with subtle discouragement, side comments, doubts planted like seeds. I don't think they really support you. I just don't like how they treat you. I don't trust their influence. And then the manufactured conflicts appear. Arguments that only happen after you spend time with certain people. Emotional heaviness tied to social interaction. Guilt disguised as concern. This happens because isolation creates psychological dependency. When you have fewer people to turn to, the manipulator becomes the only voice you rely on. Your brain stops comparing perspectives. Your world gets smaller, and a smaller world is easier to control. Your mind thinks you're choosing closeness, but the reality is you're being guided into emotional confinement. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. Isolation isn't just about losing people. It's about losing your reference points. When no one else reflects you back to yourself, your identity becomes malleable, easy to shape, easy to rewrite. And that's where the final stage begins. Identity shaping, not through force but through subtle pressure. They nudge your habits, your hobbies, your tone, your preferences. They make comments about what you should wear, how you should speak, who you should be. You start adjusting yourself. Tiny changes that feel harmless. You call it growth. You call it harmony. But slowly, you stop sounding like yourself. You lose your voice in the name of compromise. You become a character in someone else's script, playing a role that was never yours to begin with. If that hit you, good. It means you're waking up to a pattern that thrives in silence. A pattern that convinces you the destruction of your independence is somehow your decision. You weren't overreacting. You weren't too sensitive. You were being shaped, one micro moment at a time. So how do you break the cycle? Start with this. Treat every boundary you set as a test. If someone reacts with anger, guilt, or pressure, you've found the problem. Healthy people respect limits. Manipulators treat them as obstacles. Your autonomy isn't selfish. Your no isn't rude. Your preferences are negotiable, simply because someone wants more access to you. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Ask yourself, who was I before this relationship, and what pieces of that person have I lost? Anything you had to shrink to keep the peace wasn't love, it was control. And reclaiming those pieces is how you take your power back, step by step, boundary by boundary, until you belong to yourself again. Psychological entanglement, the invisible chains. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. The person who hurts you the most can also be the person your brain becomes most addicted to. Not because the relationship is healthy, not because the bond is real, but because your nervous system has confused chaos with connection. And once that wiring takes hold, walking away feels like tearing off your own skin. Psychologists call this a trauma bond. And once you understand it, you'll see why intelligent, successful, emotionally aware people still get trapped. A trauma bond doesn't rely on weakness. It relies on chemistry, on the intoxicating mix of affection and pain, validation and anxiety, closeness and withdrawal. Your relationships, your habits, even your self-worth. All of it can be shaped by this single pattern, one that binds you tighter the more you try to free yourself. But here's where it gets even worse. The cycle that keeps you hooked isn't random, it's engineered. Reward right arrow confusion. Right arrow reconciliation. Right arrow relief. Right arrow repeat. First, they flood you with affection, warmth, attention, intensity. Then comes the confusion, coldness, distance, criticism, the sudden shift you can't explain. Your brain panics, then reconciliation arrives. And the relief hits so hard it feels like love. That relief is the drug. That cycle is the trap. Here's the painful part. Your brain learns to associate emotional pain with emotional safety. It chooses comfort over growth, familiarity over freedom, even when it destroys you. You know the relationship is harmful. You know the pattern makes no sense. But your nervous system is wired to cling to the person who both wounds you and soothes you. That contradiction is the hook. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. The smarter you are, the deeper you may fall. Why? Because intelligent people analyze. They explain. They rationalize. They believe there must be a reason, a cause, a fixable flaw. They turn manipulation into a puzzle instead of a warning. They tell themselves, if I just understand them more, if I become calmer, kinder, better, things will go back to how they were. But the early version of them, the idealized one, was a strategy, not a person. This happens because trauma bonds operate at a level deeper than logic. Your brain isn't trying to evaluate the relationship. It's trying to survive it. Your mind thinks the reconciliation phase is proof of love. But the reality is that it's just relief from the pain they created. You're not attached to the person. You're attached to the emotional roller coaster. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. Guilt, obligation, and fear aren't signs of connection. They're emotional shackles. Guilt tells you that leaving makes you heartless. Obligation whispers that you owe them more time, more effort, more loyalty. Fear convinces you that life without them will hurt more than life with them. That fear is a lie your brain creates when it's trapped in a cycle of intermittent reinforcement. If that hits you, good. It means something in you is waking up. Because the paradox of trauma bonding is brutal. The relationship feels harmful, but the idea of separation feels unbearable. It's not love, it's dependency. A psychological tangle of highs and lows, where the pain sharpens the pleasure and the relief becomes the prize your brain keeps chasing. So how do you break the cycle? Start with this. Stop trying to win their affection back. Start noticing how often they make you lose yourself. Trauma bonds don't break through confrontation. They break through clarity, through recognizing the pattern, not romanticizing the relief. The real turning point isn't when you finally let go of them. It's when you remember who you were before they rewired your emotional world. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Whenever you feel the urge to return, don't replay the good moments. Replay the cycle, the confusion, the anxiety, the emotional hangover. Teach your brain to associate them not with comfort but with chaos. Once the illusion cracks, the invisible chains fall. And piece by piece, breath by breath, you begin to reclaim the freedom you forgot you deserved. Recognizing the red flags. Clarity is liberation. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. Most people sense manipulation long before they can name it, and yet they convince themselves it's their own fault. That creeping doubt, the quiet anxiety, the feeling that you're always walking on eggshells, those are the first signals, and ignoring them only tightens the invisible chains around your mind. Psychologists call this covert manipulation awareness. And once you understand it, you'll see why so many intelligent, caring people tolerate the intolerable. Your relationships, your self-esteem, even the way you make decisions. All of it can be subtly hijacked by someone skilled in emotional control. They don't scream, they don't demand. They nudge, they question, they tilt your world just enough so that your voice becomes smaller, quieter, easier to manage. But here's where it gets even worse. The red flags are subtle. You don't notice them all at once. Chronic self-doubt seeps into your mind. You feel watched, monitored, or corrected, but in ways that feel protective or helpful. Emotional exhaustion masquerades as effort, and before long, you're apologizing for feelings that never needed an apology. You're shrinking in ways that feel like compromise, but aren't. Here's the painful part. Your brain doesn't rebel because it's lazy. It rebels because it's confused. You know something isn't right, but you rationalize it. You tell yourself, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just stress. Maybe I need to try harder. Comfort often outweighs truth, unless you force it otherwise. Here's the part nobody wants to admit. Noticing a red flag doesn't immediately free you. It's only the first step. You have to ask yourself questions that cut deeper than surface awareness. Do I feel safe speaking my truth? Am I making choices, or just avoiding reactions? Am I shrinking to preserve the peace? These aren't easy questions, but clarity begins here. Reflection is your first act of rebellion against manipulation. This happens because your mind naturally seeks harmony. It prefers agreement to conflict, familiarity to uncertainty, connection to isolation. It wants to preserve bonds, even when those bonds are harmful. Your mind thinks compromise is love, but the reality is that self-erasure is control disguised as care. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. Normal conflict and covert manipulation can look very similar, and that's why so many people stay trapped. Healthy disagreement challenges ideas, encourages growth, and respects boundaries. Psychological manipulation twists conflict into control. It punishes honesty, disguises critique as concern, and makes you feel wrong for having your own perspective. Emotional honesty becomes dangerous because the manipulator wants compliance, not conversation. If that hits you good, it means you're beginning to distinguish between fear-driven obedience and genuine connection. Recognizing these patterns is the start of liberation. Because every time you notice a subtle correction or a disguised guilt trip, You reclaim a piece of yourself that was slipping away unnoticed. So how do you break the cycle? Start with guided self-reflection. Keep a mental or physical log of moments when you feel diminished, controlled, or anxious without clear reason. Ask yourself honestly, who am I when I'm with them? Do I feel respected or merely tolerated? When you name the red flags, you neutralize their power. Awareness is the antidote to manipulation. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Treat your feelings as data, not debate. If a relationship consistently leaves you exhausted, anxious, or silenced, trust that signal. Don't argue with it. Don't justify it. Observe it. Clarity is the chain breaker. The moment you stop bending to survive and start standing to thrive. Recognition is liberation. Spotting the red flags isn't weakness. It's the first act of reclaiming your autonomy, your voice, and your peace of mind. And once you can see the patterns clearly, you can finally decide not to participate in the cycle any longer. Reclaiming your power. Breaking the influence cycle. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. Leaving a manipulative relationship isn't the end of the struggle. It's only the beginning. The hardest battle isn't walking away. It's untangling your mind from theirs. Because for months, maybe years, your thoughts, your decisions, even your self-worth have been subtly edited by someone else. And now the echoes of their control follow you, whispering doubt, guilt, and fear. Psychologists call this post-manipulation recovery. And once you understand it, you'll see why freedom feels unstable at first. Your relationships, your confidence, even your sense of reality. All of it has been influenced by someone who wasn't just charming or persuasive. They were rewriting your emotional software. Separating yourself from that influence isn't just physical. It's an emotional detox, a deep separation of your inner voice from theirs. But here's where it gets even worse. Manipulators don't let go easily, and neither does your brain. You'll feel guilt, obligation, and fear pulling you back, even when you know logically the relationship was harmful. They've trained you to respond to their emotional cues, as if they were survival signals. And right after leaving, that training can trigger withdrawal, anxiety, restlessness, insomnia, emotional swings, even flashes of longing. It feels like missing a part of yourself. But the truth is, you're finally reconnecting with the part of yourself they tried to erase. Here's the painful part. Many people fail to reclaim their power because they underestimate the subtle ways guilt is weaponized. They believe leaving will erase the emotional chains, but the manipulator's voice lingers. You're overreacting. They only did it because they care. You owe them an explanation. Your brain wants to comfort itself, to preserve the familiar, even when familiar was toxic. Comfort becomes the cage. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. Healing isn't just emotional, it's tactical. You need clear boundaries paired with consequences. Saying no isn't enough if you secretly allow intrusion, messaging, or emotional pullbacks. Reclaiming power requires structure, what you will tolerate, what you won't, and what happens if your limits are breached. Without this clarity, the cycle can start again, even from a distance. This happens because your mind craves predictability. Your brain does this to protect you from the shock of change, from the fear of being alone. Your mind thinks reconciling with them will restore balance. But the reality is that emotional clarity comes from separation, not reconciliation. Your nervous system needs space to unlearn the cues it mistook for connection. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. Support systems aren't optional. They're essential. Friends, mentors, therapists, or communities who understand manipulation accelerate recovery. They reflect reality back to you, counteracting the distorted feedback loops you've internalized. Emotional detox alone is painful, but connection with truthful mirrors rebuilds perspective. The right guidance reminds you, your value isn't defined by someone else's treatment of you. If that hits you good, it means you're finally acknowledging that liberation is a process, not a single act. Reclaiming your power isn't about revenge or anger. It's about rediscovering your baseline, your preferences, your instincts. Every time you honor a boundary, resist guilt, or reaffirm a decision for yourself, you strengthen the neurological and emotional pathways of autonomy. So how do you break the cycle? Start with this. Map out your triggers and emotional flashpoints, and separate them from your current reality. Recognize that fear, guilt, or longing may be leftover signals from manipulation, not honest assessments of your life. Once you can identify these echoes, you can act freely rather than react unconsciously. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Treat every moment of self-doubt as a checkpoint, not a trap. Ask yourself, is this thought mine or a leftover of their influence? With each conscious distinction, you reclaim territory in your own mind. Over time, the invisible chains dissolve. Your decisions, your voice, your confidence, they return. And when you finally stand fully in your own power, you realize something profound. Freedom isn't just leaving them. It's never letting them or anyone else control you again. The path to emotional sovereignty. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. Losing your sense of self in a relationship isn't a failure. It's a survival mechanism. Your mind bends, adapts, and sacrifices identity to avoid conflict, to preserve connection, to feel safe. And when the manipulative influence ends, the hardest part isn't leaving them. It's finding out who you are underneath all the compromises, all the softened edges, all the erased boundaries. Psychologists call this identity reclamation after psychological erosion. And once you understand it, you'll see why rebuilding yourself feels slow, frustrating, and sometimes terrifying. Your relationships, your habits, even your confidence, all of it has been filtered through someone else's expectation. The distortion lingers, whispering doubt, questioning your instincts, shaking the foundations of what you believe to be you. But here's where it gets even worse. The gap between who you were and who you've become can feel like a void. You might try to fill it by leaning on others, adopting new identities, or chasing approval. That's the trap. Emotional sovereignty doesn't come from dependence. It comes from turning inward and rebuilding the core of yourself, piece by piece, thought by thought, choice by choice. Here's the painful part. Your brain doesn't immediately trust your instincts after manipulation. Intuition becomes clouded, second-guessing becomes automatic, and the simple act of making decisions feels heavy. Your mind thinks you need external validation to survive, when in reality, you need to learn to trust yourself again. Comfort once again becomes the cage, and the fear of error convinces you to shrink instead of expanding. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. Emotional sovereignty isn't just psychological, it's practical. Rebuilding confidence requires deliberate action, daily practices, and consistent self-reflection. Grounding exercises like journaling, meditation, or setting micro-boundaries are not fluff. They're the scaffolding that stabilizes your emotional core. Without them, old patterns creep back in unnoticed, whispering that compromise equals safety. This happens because your brain was conditioned to survive manipulation, not thrive. Your mind protects you from immediate conflict, so it clings to the habits, preferences, and tolerances that kept you safe before. The reality is that those protections now hold you back. True sovereignty comes from unlearning the scripts that were written for you and writing your own, grounded in clarity, self-trust, and autonomy. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. Creating new relationship standards isn't selfish, it's necessary. You can't engage with others on equal footing if you haven't reclaimed the authority over your own thoughts, your choices, and your emotional responses. Autonomy doesn't isolate you. It equips you to choose connections that respect and enhance your life instead of diminishing it. If that hits you, good. It means you're ready to stop letting the echoes of manipulation dictate your present. Rebuilding identity isn't instantaneous, it's iterative. Every decision you make without fear, every boundary you assert without apology, every feeling you honor without distortion, reinforces the neural and emotional pathways of your true self. So how do you begin? Start with this. Practice conscious self-recognition. Every morning, ask yourself, who am I today without needing anyone's approval? What choices reflect my values, not their influence? Journal it, speak it aloud, internalize it. This repeated alignment trains your mind to prioritize your voice above residual manipulation. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Treat your intuition like a muscle. The more you act on it, the stronger it becomes. Ignore the echoes of fear and guilt that were left behind by the manipulator. Instead, anchor every decision in your own truth. Over time, the uncertainty fades, the hesitation dissolves, and what emerges is something powerful. A self that is unshakable. a mind that trusts itself, and a heart that no longer compromises sovereignty for survival. Emotional sovereignty isn't a destination, it's a practice. But with each deliberate choice, each reclaimed instinct, and each reaffirmed boundary, you step further into the freedom of being fully unapologetically yourself. Healthy love versus covert influence. Here's a psychology fact you're not ready for. Most people can't tell the difference between love and influence until it's too late. The rush of attention, the intensity of connection, the feeling that someone completes you, it can all mask subtle control. You think it's intimacy, but sometimes it's manipulation dressed in charm. And by the time you notice, your emotions have already been hijacked. Psychologists call this emotional discernment. And once you understand it, you'll see why so many relationships that look perfect on the surface are secretly corrosive. Your habits, your confidence, even your happiness. All can be reshaped by someone skilled at controlling your feelings without ever raising their voice. Healthy love nourishes, covert influence distorts. Understanding the difference isn't optional, it's survival for your heart and mind. But here's where it gets even worse. Many people confuse intensity with authenticity. Someone who showers you with attention, who mirrors your desires, who seems to get you perfectly, it feels like destiny. But genuine connection doesn't require your surrender. Healthy partners communicate openly, resolve conflict without fear, and empower rather than dominate. Manipulators, on the other hand, use those same signals to trap you into compliance, gradually eroding your autonomy under the guise of intimacy. Here's the painful part. Emotional erosion happens so slowly, so invisibly, that even intelligent, self-aware people fall for it. You feel drained, anxious, or hesitant, but you blame yourself. Your brain chooses comfort over confrontation every single time unless you consciously intervene. You rationalize, justify, and explain away behaviors that in reality are corrosive to your emotional well-being. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. Real intimacy is not a battlefield. If your relationship feels like negotiation with invisible rules, if your emotions are constantly monitored or managed, it's not love. It's a system designed to keep you dependent. Emotional empowerment means feeling safe to speak, to disagree, to grow without fear of reprisal. Emotional erosion, by contrast, disguises fear as care, compliance as affection, and control as passion. This happens because your mind craves connection. It interprets attention, flattery, and closeness as validation. Your brain does this to protect you from loneliness and rejection. Your mind thinks compromise equals harmony. But the reality is that authentic love respects boundaries, encourages growth, and fosters equality. If you feel diminished for the sake of the relationship, you've stepped into influence, not intimacy. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. The signs of healthy love are often quiet, transparency, mutual respect, emotional safety, and freedom to be your full self. Conflict is navigated with honesty, not fear. Disagreements become opportunities for understanding, not tools for control. Real intimacy strengthens your identity rather than eroding it. Covert influence makes you doubt your instincts and question your worth. If that hit you, good. It means you're beginning to distinguish between the rush of dependency and the calm of genuine partnership. Recognizing this difference isn't just theoretical. It changes how you approach every connection. You start asking, does this relationship make me stronger, freer, more aligned with my values? Or does it shrink me, silence me, and keep me in doubt? So how do you apply this knowledge? Start with a simple exercise. Audit your relationships. Notice where you feel empowered and where you feel constrained. Ask yourself whether disagreements are safe and productive or loaded with subtle punishment. Observe whether your emotional responses are yours or scripted by someone else's influence. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Measure connection by freedom, not intensity. The louder, faster, or more intoxicating the bond, the less reliable it may be as a true indicator of love. Real love grows slowly, steadily, and without fear. Influence seeks to accelerate dependence and exploit vulnerability. By anchoring your judgment in autonomy rather than thrill, you start building relationships that align with dignity, freedom, and emotional truth. Healthy love doesn't demand compromise at the cost of your soul. It invites you to stand fully in yourself while standing together. And once you can see that clearly, the difference between genuine connection and covert influence becomes impossible to ignore. Your autonomy is non-negotiable. Finally, most people willingly give up their power in relationships without even realizing it. They bend, accommodate, and compromise until their boundaries dissolve, all in the name of love, connection, or keeping the peace. And the cruel truth, it's often invisible until the damage is done. Your autonomy, the very core of who you are, becomes negotiable, but it was never meant to be. Psychologists call this subtle surrender, and once you understand it, you'll see why your confidence faltered, why your decisions felt heavy, and why certain relationships left you feeling diminished. Your relationships, your habits, even your self-esteem are all influenced by the subtle ways people can encroach on your inner world. Recognizing this pattern isn't optional. It's the difference between living in someone else's shadow and stepping fully into your own light. But here's where it gets even worse. Many people spend years trapped in cycles of emotional compromise, believing that sacrifice is the same as love. They mistake control for care, manipulation for attention, and dependence for intimacy. This misinterpretation is deeply ingrained, almost reflexive. Your brain interprets closeness as safety, even when it is slowly eroding your sense of self. Here's the painful part. Your brain chooses comfort over growth every single time, unless you force it to change. That means the feelings of fear, guilt, or obligation you experience when asserting yourself are not failures. They're your mind signaling that it's breaking old patterns. Emotional growth is uncomfortable, and liberation requires confronting the discomfort rather than avoiding it. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. Freedom is not just a psychological concept, it is a practice. Autonomy is rebuilt through conscious choices, reinforced boundaries, and daily reaffirmations of your worth. It's in the small moments, saying no without apology, refusing to bend to manipulation, honoring your emotions even when they conflict with someone else's demands. Each act strengthens the foundation of your true self. This happens because your brain was trained to prioritize survival over sovereignty. Your mind does this to protect you from conflict, rejection, or abandonment. Your thoughts, reactions, and even your emotional responses were conditioned to accommodate others, often at the cost of your well-being. The reality is that true power comes from reclaiming those reactions, learning to act from your own values rather than external pressure. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. True love expands you. Manipulation shrinks you. Your autonomy is the foundation of every real connection. If your relationships require you to sacrifice your voice, suppress your instincts, or compromise your integrity, they are not built on love, they are built on control. Recognizing this distinction is liberating, but it also demands vigilance and courage. If that hit you, good. It means you're ready to stop letting the currents of influence dictate your life. Autonomy is not selfish. It is essential. Without it, connection becomes compromise, intimacy becomes dependence, and love becomes a trap. Reclaiming your power starts with awareness and is solidified through consistent action. Choosing self-respect over approval, clarity over confusion, and truth over comfort. So how do you put this into practice? Start with a simple daily ritual. Pause before every major decision and ask yourself, am I acting from my own will, or am I deferring to someone else's influence? Reflect, journal, and reaffirm your boundaries. Each small act of self-determination strengthens the neural and emotional pathways that reinforce your sovereignty. Here's the mental trick that actually works. Treat autonomy like an unshakable foundation. Every thought, every choice, every interaction should be tested against it. If it supports your sense of self, it's aligned with true connection. If it erodes your boundaries or forces you to shrink, it's influence masquerading as intimacy. You were never meant to live under someone's shadow. You were meant to return to your own light. And once you recognize that, once you embrace the non-negotiable nature of your autonomy, every relationship, every choice, and every moment becomes an opportunity to live fully, authentically, and powerfully. True liberation is not granted. It is claimed step by step, boundary by boundary, until the invisible chains of influence shatter and your selfhood stands unbroken. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might find it helpful. Your support means everything. and helps this channel grow and reach more people. And if you'd like to go even further in supporting the channel, consider joining as a member to get exclusive content and behind-the-scenes insights. Stay curious, stay powerful, and I'll see you in the next one.